basic techniques. Measuring, essentially. Have you ever added too much pepper to a recipe? I know, it's not so great afterwards, but it's an innocent mistake. But in the lab, you have to be sure to have precise measurements. So, we're going to learn how to get those now.
We'll be using the volumetric pipette, the burette, the volumetric flask, and the syringe. Now for some basic rules. First and foremost, keep all glassware clean. You want to be able to clearly read the markings on all your equipment. Therefore, keep it clean. Also, you always need to read at the bottom of the meniscus. The meniscus is the curved interface between the air and the liquid. You need to read at eye level and at the bottom of the meniscus in order to get a correct reading. Now for the basics of washing your equipment. First, use soap solution to clean it. Then, rinse with tap water. Then rinse with distilled water, rinsing thoroughly each time. Finally, rinse with solvent if appropriate and let dry. Now let's cover the equipment. Pipettes are used to measure small quantities of volume, usually up to 10 milliliters. They work on the principle of creating a vacuum. Notice the pipette's gradation marks. Now let's learn all about the bulb. Here is the bulb of a volumetric pipette. Squeeze A and then squeeze this section of the bulb and you'll create a vacuum. If you want to suction up liquid, squeeze S. If you want to expel liquid, squeeze E. Here's a demonstration of creating and then releasing the vacuum.
Caution! Never use your mouth to suction up liquids.
Now for some basic pipetting. First, you need to create a vacuum. Squeeze A and push in the bulb to do this. To draw up liquid, squeeze S. There it goes. And to expel your liquid, you then want to squeeze E. Down it goes. When you're all done, squeeze A again to release the vacuum. Now for filling a pipette. First, create a vacuum. Then, draw up past the 0 mark. This is to coat the interior walls. Then, expel all your liquid. Draw up past the 0 mark once again, but this time, slowly release to the 0 mark. Or, you may choose to slowly draw up to the 0 mark instead.
Caution! Never allow any liquid to enter the bulb.
Finally, cleaning the pipette. You want to rinse with soap and water and solvent as usual, but remember, don't get anything in the bulb. Volumetric flasks are used to dilute solutions. What would we need for this process? The flask, powder, or concentrated solution instead, a funnel and stirring rod for guiding in the solution, solvent for rinsing, solvent for pouring in and diluting, and finally a pipette to add the last drops up to the gradation mark. If you're going to make a solution from powder, uncap the flask and add your weighed powder into the flask carefully. Alternatively, you may choose to use concentrated solution instead. Use a funnel and possibly a stirring rod to guide the solution into the flask. Now it's very important that you rinse with the appropriate solvent. In our case, we're diluting with water, but you may be using something else. Be sure to rinse the beaker, the stirring rod, and the funnel 3 times each. Add these washings directly to the flask. Now for adding the solvent. Take your solvent and fill the flask half full. Swirl or invert to facilitate dissolution. Then add more solvent, but be sure not to fill to the gradation mark. Notice here how we didn't fill it up to the mark. Let the flask sit to allow drainage from the interior walls.
Important. Make sure your solute is completely dissolved.